So I think, Julia, you probably don't need an introduction, but just in very brief, I think most of us have heard that in the past, almost 5 years, I guess, Julia's founded Mila's Miracle Foundation. And so she's the founder and the CEO who founded the foundation after her seemingly healthy 6-year-old daughter, Mila, was diagnosed with Batten's disease. And she really has done tremendous work at the grassroots level, shepherding supporters from all around the world, working with Timothy Yu at Boston Children's. So I'll really leave it up to her to tell her story. And I think Allison and I and Kara were very lucky that we got to spend a lot of time with her and ask a lot of questions. And I think we can go in a few different directions. So I think, Julia, I'll maybe leave it up to you to start the discussion, and then we'll have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you, Lisha. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you guys, because this is I've given many talks and presentations, but this is kind of a very new setting for me to talk in. I think most of you know Mila's story, but I don't want to you totally know it. So I'll just give kind of a little brief overview, if that's okay. And then based on discussions with a number of you, a number of topics came up that seemed like they would be interesting to bring up. So I'll bring those up and add some thoughts on those in the first half. And then I will open up, I'll leave plenty of time for everyone to ask questions, and I'd love to be able to help wherever I can. My preface of this is that when I first entered the rare disease world and Mila was diagnosed with Batten disease about 4.5 years ago, I didn't know I had no idea what bioethicists were. And, perhaps naively, I assumed that they were these big, scary that were going to impede, forward progress for parents like me. And then I learned over time, especially working with Tim and Boston Children's and with a number of other ethicists that kind of became involved over time, including after Mila was treated. I learned that it was very different, and I'm still learning, but it seems that it's more exciting to me now, where I see that, bringing up the right topics now, especially in the beginning of individualized medicine. And really, I just see it as an opportunity. And I see that you guys are trying to take these topics on, explore them aggressively, is the word I always like to use that no one likes in science, but I'm going to always continue using it, is really like carefully and aggressively talking about these topics. And I see it instead of impeding, but instead this cool opportunity to really try to tackle these topics and use them to open up opportunities instead. So yeah, I'm excited to be, now that I understand all this more over the last few years, I'm excited to be here today. So Mila, Mila was, as many of you know, was completely normal. I had my life was completely average Colorado life until she was, pretty much between 5 and 6. I had concerns between 3.5 and 5, but they were very minor. And every person, including doctors, told me I was kind of crazy. You've heard this story from other rare disease parents, I'm sure. And I dragged Mila to about 100 different doctor and therapist appointments around the country, in Canada, and various other places. But really, she was hiking and skiing and just incredibly outgoing, which makes Mila's story was probably a little bit more, it drew more people in, because I think people kind of felt like Mila could be their kid or their granddaughter or their niece, because she was just really outgoing and really typical. And then between 5 and 6 was really kind of the big decline, where she really was stumbling and falling and had black eyes and bruises all over her, and everything she walked across in our house was broken, and clearly something was wrong. And I started hearing more and more doctors kind of really look confused and stumped. They just could not figure it out. And I kept hearing this little thread of like, well, it could be this really rare genetic thing, but like, we're not going to go down that path because like, it's so rare. It's so unlikely. And so I kind of, didn't pay any attention to that either. And then, zoom ahead to her 6th birthday, I went on a run. I remember it was very distinct, because I went on a run behind my house. I got bitten by 2 German shepherds, and it didn't faze me at all. And I was like, when I came home, that's actually how I knew that there was something really wrong, because I'd been crying on this run and really concerned about Mila, and completely unfazed by the fact that I was bitten by dogs. And the people around me were like, Julia, are you okay? You have a giant bite in your leg. And I was like, no, sorry, I'm thinking of Mila right now. And I woke up the next day and I'm like, okay, something is really wrong. I can't do this anymore. So, I brought Mila to the ER because I gave up on every other option and brought her to Children's Hospital Colorado. They kept her for a week at that time. Now diagnostics are getting better, but at that time, 4.5 years ago, it was like, a battery of tests. And I could tell within 30 seconds of entering the ER that something was way worse than I thought. Because I heard them saying epilepsy, and what's epilepsy and seizures? I had no idea what they were talking about. And they shone a light in her eyes and they said, oh, I think she's, she can't see anything. And so it really escalated within seconds, to be honest, once I brought her in. They did a battery of tests. They did a genetic panel. And within a few weeks, we found out that she had this ultra rare type of an already rare disease. She had Batten-Celan-7. There was nothing, on the internet, you could find 2 or 3 people that knew anything about it. There was nothing going on. So I started reaching out to other parents. Anyone who could would say, hey, I have a friend in New York and they have a kid that has a rare disease and they nothing to do with Batten. And so I started speaking with these other parents and really honestly, those kind of that first generation of fighting parents, a lot of them had lost their children, to be honest. Most of them had really, really fueled my interest in like learning more because I didn't know anything about this. And so I started reading everything I possibly could. Every time a name came up that had to do with Batten or lysosomal storage, I just found them and via email or phone until I could track them down and talk to them. And I was just a sponge, and probably 90% of the people I talked to had nothing that probably wasn't even that helpful for me, but it kind of painted the background of like what's happening in genetic disease, what's happening in diagnostics, what's happening in treatments, like nothing, and so I just did my best. And Mila was so radiant and hysterically laughing and smiling. And, she couldn't see at that point, but really that aspect, looking at my daughter all day, every day and seeing how she could not see anymore, but she was just as happy and like really just like loving life and really trying. I could see her trying so hard to not fall and not trip and not choke on her food and trying to get her words out. It's horrible. I mean, it was the most painful thing ever, but I saw her fighting. And really honestly, between the kind of little tidbits of hope that I got from scientists, like, Julia, you are so far away from getting a treatment for Batten disease. Like it's such a complicated disease. You're like 10 years minimal. I have numerous NIH researchers tell me that, but then at the same time, I kind of saw this hope, and other parents and a few doctors said, well, we're kind of almost like at the point where we might be able to slow a disease or we might be able to stop one, but we're not quite there. And then I would look at Mila and I'm like, I just got to give this the best shot. Who knows what I can do, And so I founded Mila's Miracle Foundation, knew nothing about 501c3s, learned from anyone and everyone that would give me any advice on like how to raise money or how to talk to the media. I let everyone into my house between crying for most of the day and tried to rally and take care of my kids, and then tried to like talk to the news that walked into my house. And then at night tried to read papers on lysosomal storage, which I didn't understand, and read like genetics 101, like online books, and tried to kind of figure all of this out, and started coming together. I started realizing that no one knew anything about this gene. So I started down the gene therapy path, which sounded like gene replacement therapy, which sounded like kind of my only shot. A lot of great parents gave me advice. I used the first money that I started raising by telling Mila's story to have a really great scientist in Germany who had done her PhD on Batten disease, kind of help me navigate the gene therapy route. I was lucky enough to be put in touch with Stephen Gray, and lucky enough that he saw that I was going to try to move mountains. So he started working with me. At the time he was at UNC. And so we started down that gene therapy path. But, as many of you probably have heard, Mila was kind of had this half diagnosis where she had one of 2 mutations found. And her dad, her dad's mutation was found and mine was not. And so when I reached out on Facebook looking for some help on how to get into a whole genome sequencing, which sounded like the only shot I had, no lab could find her mutation. It ended up landing, my request ended up landing through an old friend from college who's a physician in Boston, passed it on to a group, and it landed on Dr. Tim Yu's desk. And within 24 hours, we were in touch. He was amazing. He just really wanted to help me in the beginning. He just wanted, he was interested from a research point of view of finding this difficult to find mutation. And he, within 24 hours, was on the phone, and within probably 2 days, he had samples from all 4 of us, Mila's dad, myself, and her brother and I. And, over the next few months, I won't go into detail because I know you guys know most of these details, but, over the next few months, he worked really hard, really just to kind of locate what ended up being this crazy, unusual and chronic mutation, and he even found it. And then to tell me that my son was not even a carrier of Batten disease, having just lived months every day thinking I was going to lose both of my children. Aslan was so young and Mila was perfect at his age. So I just thought he might start losing his vision and start tripping and falling. And that was beyond unbearable. So that news was amazing. And then to hear him take it a step farther and say, hey, I have this idea, but it's just an idea right now, like keep going down the gene therapy route. There is this drug Spinraza that just came out. It happens to be that Mila and Mila's disease and her mutation, I'll explain to you later, but things are kind of lining up and it makes me have an idea. It's kind of a crazy notion, but let me go down this path. In the meantime, concentrate on the gene therapy, which I did. And so over the course of that year, 2017, I continued working on the gene therapy and continued staying in close touch with Dr. Yu. And his idea started to turn into something real because all the boxes that he was checking started to line up. He said, if I come to a closed door, then I'm going to come to a closed door and we're going to have to stop. But he never came to a closed door. And so, by the end of that year, we had flown to Boston to meet an ethics committee within Boston Children's Hospital, and to have a bunch of physicians meet with Mila and see where she was at. And she was still smiling and laughing. And she was so super excited because some of the doctors gave her like an Elsa, she was very in love with Frozen. And then even more hilarious was Tim said, I have a co-PI and his name is Olaf. And Mila's, one of her last words and her favorite character was Olaf from Frozen. And so I told Mila, I said, Mila, we're going into the doctor's office and we're going to see Dr. Olaf. And she was hysterically laughing. Like she thought Olaf, the snowman, was like going to see her in the hospital. And she couldn't see him, so when he started talking to her, she was just so excited. And so, that ended up turning into moving to Boston. And, I ended up handing most of the reins for the gene replacement therapy over to another family working that. I was still funded all their preclinical work. I still, that trial is actually about to start, which is symbolically interesting in timing, as Mila just passed away, as you all know. And that gene therapy trial is about to start. So all of that work actually was all worth it. But I wasn't able to do both. So I switched my focus over to Milasen, moved to Boston. We started the treatment and had no idea what to expect, except for that it looked promising enough to try. And Mila was declining incredibly quickly. Unfortunately, about 2 months before Milasen, Mila went off of a cliff typical of Batten disease, where it's kind of a slow decline and then a cliff and a slow decline and a cliff. And she went off of a big one, unfortunately, right after her 7th birthday. And timing, I look back and it's not worth thinking about, but she didn't have any visual seizures and she suddenly had like 30 a day with arms and legs smashing. And it just was so extreme and it happened so quickly. She could not say any more words. She was really having a hard time holding her body up. I would have her push her stroller outside and then every single day religiously to keep her walking. And I could see her slumping and her legs tripping and falling. And so, that 2 months time, we'll never know, but she declined pretty quickly in that 2 months time. It was really a race then. And so she started receiving Milasen, and very soon after that, we started noticing pretty important changes. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but I will say in that first year, it was pretty drastic. It was not just stabilized and stopped, which it was improvements. I mean, Mila was having her feeds through the G tube and she went back to eating by mouth, pureed foods, but for a few years. She couldn't lift her feet up to go up the stairs. I was holding her fully, supporting her from behind. But then suddenly we had these super steep stairs in Boston and she was able to, in a rental house, and she was able to go, I remember like within a month after her treatment, she was able to lift her feet and go all the way up, alternating feet up to top a number of times, not every day, with me holding her from behind, and she hadn't been before. She was sitting cross-legged at some point all of that first year, cross-legged with her back straight by herself on the floor. And that was like balance and posture. And it was just really, it went beyond what we expected. And then the second year was kind of like stable, but I could see that there was maybe some decline. I would have to look back 1 year prior to that and see, well, I wonder if that's as good as it was a year ago. And then the third year, she'd had 3 years of Milasen. This last year, so kind of during COVID, she declined, and it was very slow. But what happened is that by the disease progressing, it led to disease-specific problems. Like, for example, her hip came out of the socket. That was something that I didn't expect to happen. I had actually no idea that happens in some neurodegenerative diseases. They didn't expect for it to happen for a long time. And honestly, COVID and lack of movement and lack of my therapists actually made a pretty big impact, and it is what it is. But we were very active in moving her, and suddenly with COVID, we weren't. And right at that time, her hip really came out of the socket much faster than I expected. And when she did that, it put me in a situation where quality of life came up as a big question for me as a mother. And it was not a surgery I wanted to put her through of breaking a lot of bones, and being on morphine for the rest of her life was not also good. So that's kind of what led me, and that's for another discussion I would love to have with you guys of end of life things, which has been really a very hard thing for me over this last year, having fought so hard for Mila's life and having to pivot and fight for her in a different way. So that's kind of, where we are during all of this time, during these 3 years of Milasen. Tim, you and I have been really talking a lot with many, many people in this field, really to be kind of like a sponge and learn what people thought about this, because we didn't go into this thinking like, we're going to pioneer individualized medicine. It was like, can we save Mila as like a last ditch effort? And then we learned, that this was the first time that a drug tailored to one person had happened, and kind of learned the repercussions and potential opportunity. And so no, here I am today now, having, really talked to so many different incredible people, researchers and doctors, and, VCs are trying to see if we turn this into a business model, all these different people, ethicists. And it's fascinating. And I see it more than anything as, and this is where I'll start talking and bring up some topics to talk to you guys about, is, now individualized medicines are possible, period, right? They've happened. So it's here. The question now is, this is a new way of thinking how to treat, and I'm going to use rare disease it's a new way to treat medicine, but I'm going to say, anyone, but in rare disease in particular, it's a new possible platform solution to what I consider an incredibly devastating problem. 60 million children that have rare diseases. I mean, it's drastic. And I look back I've been doing a lot of research in the HIV and AIDS era and how that changed drug development. COVID is a good example. My mother has stage 4 cancer, so I've been learning all about oncology as well. And rare disease in children alone is drastic. I mean, it's up there, if not worse than all of these. And 60 million children, each of those have a whole family that's taking care of them. So the ripple effect is pretty huge. And to have a possible platform solution for something, that Mila has broken the ice, but now we have to face it. We have to talk about, how do we do this, So I guess the question I have is that I think about is, can we repeat this? Can we scale this? The only way to do that is to treat more children and to get more data and to learn, does it work? Is it safe? And the only way to do that is to treat more children. I think that sometimes individualized medicine scares everyone in this industry, because it seems like, my analogies, it seems like a new sport, and we don't know what the name of the sport is. We don't know what jerseys you wear. We don't know how big the field is or where the goals are. And, what does the ref do? And, it's kind of scary. Instead of thinking of it that way, I'm starting to think of it more as kind of modernizing the system instead of tearing it down. The system exists. Now we have this kind of new paradigm. So now we kind of have to just modernize with it and not start from scratch. It's not a new sport, So that's my first kind of thought. And if it's okay with you guys, I'd love to talk through a few of these points, and then I'd love for you to go back to any of these and ask me any questions. So I'm thinking a lot about it as modernizing the current system. Another topic that comes to mind is kind of what the goal or the purpose of an individualized treatment. I'm going to use Milasen specifically. What was the purpose? It was an intersection of compassionate use and research. And in fact, that is actually what happened, because the original goal was, can we do something that could actually stop this disease? And we started learning, well, maybe this actually could really help research as a whole for all rare diseases. And we wanted to stop, or I'm very hesitant to use the word cure, but stop this disease. And it did stop it. It did improve it. And it was successful in that way. Over time, we learned that it didn't stop it. It was too late for Mila. Too many dominoes had fallen. She was 7 years old. The processes in her neurons had already continued, I think, too far down the road. But then it turned into a quality of life. So a kind of a different purpose and goal. So I questioned and I thought to myself, should I continue Milasen? A number of times, probably more towards the end of the second year, maybe into the third year mostly. But I saw that, it's a small disease. We only have 30 people that we know of in the world. So the natural history is what it is. We just know that it's a very steep decline and that you lose pretty much all of your abilities except for hearing, so it's very obvious where Mila was going. And, Mila was on 0.5 ml of one seizure medicine. Most kids with that are on 2, 3 to 9 at the same time. We were almost never at the doctor's office. We were not helicoptered there. She did not stop. We didn't have a shaking vest. We didn't, her life, her quality of life, even when I could see that we couldn't stop the disease, was drama free. We didn't have all the side effects of all these medicines because she didn't really need them. So Milasen was, I am guessing as a mother, that it was greatly controlling her seizures, at least in the minimal, because she was on such a low dose of seizure meds. And she started having seizures more in the third year for sure, but they weren't dramatic. They were tiny little movements of her head. And our life was not medical, which it kind of should have been. And so I think it's going to be important for these individualized medicines to realize, especially in these first few years, and especially in these more serious cases like Mila's of degenerative diseases, is that you may set out, our goal is, can we come up with, let's say, an ASOs that stop diseases in time? We diagnose them earlier, we get to them earlier, and they can stop the disease. But even in these early years where it may shift to compassionate use over time because children are progressing quickly and we get to them too late, that still has an enormous value, enormous. I can't even tell you, as a mother, I didn't have drama in my life. I had sadness that I couldn't stop her disease. But both the stopping of the disease and eventually coming up with a quote unquote cure, and for research purposes, and then compassionate use kind of really helping quality of life. Those are two goals or purposes, I think, of an individualized drug that can happen simultaneously. Another topic, which I think is an important one, is setting expectations correctly for families. I can only tell you in my specific situation that Dr. Yu was great with me in the sense that he explained things from the beginning that helped me have, like I always say, I had a foot in hope and a foot in reality. I was always tried really to stay grounded, even when I was so hopeful, and I'm a very positive person. But I didn't ever shift fully to one or the other. Dr. Yu explained, to give you kind of concrete examples, I remember him explaining the difference between Batten and SMA, because Mila's drug was being based on Spinraza, which was so wildly successful. I remember him telling me, Julia, SMA is in the spinal column. So you're giving a drug in the spinal column, and that's where the disease is. For Mila, it has to travel up her spinal column. It has to penetrate the brain and get down to the depths of the brain. That's harder to do. We don't know yet. We've only kind of used an ASO through the CNS, through the cerebrospinal fluid, for a disease that is not exactly the same as Batten disease. So you need to understand the difference. He also explained to me that, which I thought was a really helpful visual picture. He explained to me, hey, Mila's neurons are dying. Some of them have already died. Some of them are in the process of dying, and we might be able to stop that. And some of them are in the process of dying, and we might not be able to stop that. And that was an incredibly helpful thing to know from the get-go, because that's kind of what I saw, is Mila was in this kind of limbo, where some of her disease may have stopped and slowed and other parts didn't. And, that eventually leaves parents later at some point in a point where, do I like the place where my child has landed that's in this kind of limbo? Is that a good quality of life? And that's a different discussion. But I think he correctly set those expectations, and I really kind of always was able to have hope and reality as both sides of me every day of the last 3 years. Another topic which I think is important is that we often talk about the risk benefit paradigm, and it took me a while to find the right terms because it never felt right for Mila. I kind of changed the terms to fit what made sense for me in this kind of new individualized medicine world, where it was the risk of treating Mila specifically versus the risk of not treating Mila. And when I faced this treatment, people have asked me, like, did you have hesitations? Were you scared? I wasn't, because the risk of not treating Mila, it doesn't matter whether she stopped talking at 6 or 7, like their natural history matters, but for a degenerative disease that's fatal, to me as a parent, it doesn't really matter, because you look at all the kids and pretty much all of them, unless you have a really crazy variant, and Mila was following very typical progression over the first 7 years of her life before she received that. Clearly, like, the risk of not treating her, we knew what the line was going to look like. It didn't matter if it was off by a few months or a few years, like it was going down steeply and it was going to end sometime in the next few years. And so when I thought about the risk of not treating, it was obvious. When I thought about the risk of treating, I thought, well, I did my homework. I talked to Tim. ASOs, there were decades of experience, especially with animals, with ASOs. And so it wasn't voodoo science. There weren't feathers and gems involved. This was very legit science, and it offered Mila hope. Was it going to work? We didn't know, but it made sense to me, especially when, her cells in the lab, for whatever it's worth, which was worth a lot to me, were being restored to health in the lab. That was a big deal, And so as a parent, it seemed like unethical for me to not at least give it the best shot possible in this very legit science that could be applied to my daughter, and her cells looked like they were responding really well. So the risk of treating her was, I never spent 1 second questioning whether or not it was worth treating her. I told myself the night before we started Milasen, I said, I hope that Mila either dies on the spot, because as a parent, that's what you kind of hope, or that this is going to work. Now, obviously, I know that that's not so black and white, but that's what was going through my head at that time. And she didn't have any adverse reactions to it. And, would I have gone back and ever changed anything? No, not at all. So to me, it was the risk of treating versus the risk of not treating. There is an analogy that's come to mind over the last few years, just probably recently in the last year, is that the analogy kind of feels like a brain tumor. It feels like a friend of a friend just lost their little daughter to a brain tumor. And, when she went into the doctor, the doctor said, you have a brain tumor. If you don't take it out, this is what's going to happen. You might lose your vision, you might lose your ability to walk and talk, you might die. If you, and I'm sure gave percentages and, chance, if you go in and you remove the brain tumor, there are risks involved. And you might also lose your vision, you might lose your ability to talk, you might die, and here's some other percentages, right? But I hadn't really thought of it that way, but because something like a brain tumor is kind of individualized in a way, it's very specific to that person and where that brain tumor is and what are the risks for that kid, It felt similar when I heard that conversation. I thought that's actually really similar to what went through my head. So anyway, that's just an analogy to think about. Another topic which has come up, and I think a bunch of you guys have brought it up, is equity. And I think that the way I think about this is that the ultimate goal is that, and I started coining phrases that may or may not make sense for you guys, but I took it from kind of the college process, admission process, is like need blind patient selection. The ultimate goal is that we are choosing patients based on whether their disease and their mutation is amenable, whether the child is in the right place in their disease to really make an impact and potentially stop the disease. That's where we're headed for sure. However, we are in a transition time right now. And the reality is there is not funding for these diseases. For rare diseases in general, and certainly not for individualized treatments, there isn't funding. So the reality is, whether we like it or not, the people that are funding rare disease, I like to consider rare disease parents almost as like a parallel NIH. I mean, the amount of money, I'd love to see the statistics, and no one seems to have them, of how much money rare disease parents have put into rare disease treatments is massive. And I will tell you, in this first wave, this last few years, most of these parents, including myself, you don't win. I mean, I like to consider myself win because Mila's quality of life was improved. So I don't want to say that I lost. However, these parents that are raising money are generally right now, yes, they could be helping their kids for sure, but it's really helping push science forward because no one else is funding rare disease treatments. So I consider this a transition time where it's an opportunity to me. If parents, it's sad that the burden falls on me when I want to spend time with Mila. I lost a lot of time with her so that I could, raise the money and the awareness and put the scientists together to make Milasen happen. Would I ever change that? No, not at all, because I gave her the best shot possible. But in the meantime, I did realize, like a lot of these parents, I realized pretty quickly that like this was maybe not time for Mila. But I felt, and I still feel today, why I'm here today and why I continue to do this is that I'm now on the other side of the glass. I see what it's like. I didn't know this world existed, and it needs voices and it needs people and it needs money to get going. And right now, today, it's the beginning. It requires families who are willing to raise money and awareness and put scientists across institution collaborations that wouldn't normally happen. And they're able to do that. All that stuff is necessary right now, hoping that we can move towards a system that is more need blind and that is not funded by parents, and that we have a more scalable model, that allows for funding to come from another source. But that's not the reality right now. So I try to turn negative situations into positive ones. And I see this more as an opportunity than anything else. Another question that Allison asked me to kind of talk about was my son, Aslan, who's just turned 7, and just how I communicated about Mila, as a sibling. And, he was very young. So he's been brought to every doctor's appointment, his entire life until a month ago was Mila. So like I didn't have time to teach him how to ride a bike. Barely did. I didn't have time to teach him how to swim. I didn't have time to do puzzles with him, and I did. I'm a very hands-on mother, so I spent a lot of time with him, don't get me wrong. But, I recently realized after Mila passed away that I didn't really know my son. And I told him that, and he said, I know, mommy, I know you were always thinking about Mila. And it's like the first time in, the last month that I actually can sit and be present. I'm here right now in New Mexico with him because it's my first road trip and chance to be with just him and be able to spend time with him, and I was so afraid that he was going to feel left out and feel resentful, because I had always focused on Mila. But instead, I see that he's really turned that to be such a good person, so helpful. Just yesterday, I was in a little coffee shop here, and he walked up to a woman who was working and said, "Hi, I have a sister who died, but she had a rare disease. And what I love most is nature and rare diseases. When I want to grow up, I want to be a doctor and help kids with rare diseases. And my mom wants to work with doctors and he told him this whole thing. This poor woman was sitting there. She was actually really nice, but I can see that he really cares, and that what he got out of it was he saw me fight for Mila. He saw me try to take care of her and interact with her. He saw that life isn't fair, and that, having a positive attitude and turning really negative, sad things into things that are opportunities to appreciate what you have, and really live in the moment, and really appreciate with Mila the tiny things, singing to her, putting my hand on her. We couldn't travel, we couldn't go do activities, so we had to stick to really simple things. So he's a kid who doesn't need a lot to be happy. He understands that little things, are what matter. So, and then as Mila was kind of ending the end of her life, I wasn't sure how to handle that. And I got some good advice from some friends who've gone through a lot of grief in their life. And they just said, don't tailor this to him. Just ask him if he wants what he wants to know, and I did. And I was scared about that, but he was amazing. And he said, I want to know everything. So I told him everything about what was going on in my head with Mila. And I said, do you think she's happy now? And he said, no, she's been really happy for a long time, but just recently she doesn't seem so happy, and so I really included him in the entire end of life process, more than I thought any 6-year-old at the time could ever handle. And I didn't want him to look back later in life and feel like confused, like what happened? I had a sister and she got worse and then she just disappeared. And, so I definitely did not keep him out of that. He was very involved. And I see him now thriving. I'm surprised, I'm shocked. He understands. He talks about rare disease all the time. He asks every time I bring up any kid. He said, Mommy, I want to know the exact name of that rare disease. And I want you to explain it to me. What happens in that disease? So, I hope that Aslan takes what was very sad and negative and turns it into something where he can help, as he gets older. The last thing I wanted to bring up was more than just because people have been drawn to it. So I thought I would just highlight it, and I'll screen share in just a minute, is in the last 6 months of Mila's life, I had a hard time because the whole world seemed to have their eyes on Mila and they saw me fighting for her. And at that same time, I noticed that Mila wasn't doing well. And I didn't want to, I'd always been really honest about Mila. And I didn't want to feel like I was just showing like that really rare moment when she almost smiled, and on social media or, when I was giving presentations, people would say, how's Mila doing? And I didn't know how to answer that, like not well, but she's doing a lot better than she's supposed to be, but I don't really love her quality of life. And she doesn't seem very happy right now. And so I asked a photographer friend of mine, a number of friends said to me, Julia, I wish people could just come into your house, and just see what your life is like. And so I basically had a photographer come over unannounced for 6 months, just all the time, every few days. And she would just show up and really do these kind of black and white photos that were photojournalism style. And she just caught our life. And I don't want to spend too much time now because we don't have much time. I will just screen share really briefly if it's okay. Let's see if I can. So if you can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I launched this and, I've been publishing these on social media and I've noticed that a lot of people in the industry have been looking at them. I've kind of thousands every time I publish. And, these were photos where I tried to capture my daily, life. And it was primarily for me to really get through a period that I knew was going to be really difficult. It helped me kind of heal. But it turned out that a lot of people were looking at these in the industry, and I really wanted to show kind of the weight, have people feel the weight of what it was like to live with a rare disease, not just a presentation at a scientific conference where you talk about numbers, like 60 million kids have rare disease, and I look around the room and no one's kind of flinching. I really wanted people to actually feel what it was like to be in a home with a child and be in an average moment, where, this photo, for example, I try with my copy when I write it to really stop and look at the picture for like 10 minutes. And I think, what did I feel like, that this was just the day before or something, and for me, it was, when I was fighting for Mila's treatment, I was on a mission to keep her walking. She pushed her stroller down the block and back every day. With treatment, her posture and steps stabilized, even improved. But over this past year, Mila's determined little feet dragged, then finally gave up. The thought of a wheelchair is unbearable. So I pick her up and carry her, always careful not to let her feel the impact her 62-pound body has on my back and neck. I take a breath, relax my shoulders, and talk to her quietly as I carry her. And so that was a very common thing for me, to like really hard to carry her, but I didn't want her to feel that it was hard for me. So I will send you guys the link to that. You can look at it later. I just thought it was an opportunity once again to, there we go, an opportunity for me to let people in the industry see and feel more than anything what life was like. and I'm continuing to follow it. I wasn't going to, but I'm continuing because I am a single mom of Aslan, and I have to continue living, and I have to find a way to live without Mila. And I feel like no one really wants to go there, but I want to make sure that I'm bringing up these topics and continuing to talk about them. So I'll stop there. I'm sorry it took so much time, and I would love to hear any questions you guys have, and I'm happy to answer anything.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. I think we can open it up. I had a bunch of questions for you when we met earlier, but I think there were so many different topics you touched on. And so I first just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing such a deeply personal story with us. Andrew, you're welcome to start.
Hi, how are you doing? Julie, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Andrew McFadden. I'm the Executive Director of 2 patient organizations located here in Canada. And I can empathize with what you're going through because I have a son that has a devastatingly rare disease as well. And we've been raising millions of dollars and funding gene therapy research. And I fielded a lot of questions about equity of access, et cetera, because even though we funded that project, he's received gene therapy as well. As you said, you know, we're funding these types of things, and our children need access for sure. But I don't have much to say except for thank you for sharing this. I think it was powerful, and I know how difficult it is, and continues to be for you. You've done remarkable work here, and you're continuing to do remarkable work, and I'm ever thankful for that. I actually already had you on my radar before this. I deal with CLN2 here in Canada, and we've been involved with every single family with CLN2, and I know the challenges that Batten disease brings every single day. And I can tell you that all of the families that I deal with on a daily basis, they can't deal with both. They can't fight, and they can't fund research, and they can't do everything that you've done. And so you have a superpower here, and I'm thankful that you've put all of that energy to good use. I know again how remarkably difficult this is. I'll reach out to you after via email, because there's a few things that I'd like to connect with you about, but I wanted to just be the first to say thank you for this, and it was powerful. And I'm pretty good at separating my work here with my family life, and I think my colleagues can attest to that, but this one got to me today, and credit to you for doing that, because if you can get to somebody like me, you've got to everybody else on this panel as well. So good work.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, Julia. Nice to see you. Just for the gang, Julia and I had a conversation before, and I got to meet Mila. And I just thank you so much. And I echo everything Andrew said. And I've been looking into this area for a while, and I learned a lot today. And I wanted to ask you specifically about something you mentioned that I hadn't thought about. And you mentioned that you had a switch from, you know, what you were going through to start thinking about, like, to extending her life or her quality of life. And then you realized that you had to start thinking about her end of life. And I wanted to ask if this was something that you considered at the very beginning. I mean, you knew the trajectory of the disease, and you knew the chances, and you did have hope, and it could have been, in fact, a miracle, but it also could not have been. And I wondered if this was something that you considered at the beginning, that there would be quality of end of life discussions, or if this dawned on you. It sounded like it kind of at some point just kind of like, oh yeah, I didn't realize this. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's a good question. The way I would describe the way I face my life, this is just me personally, is that I think going into this, I thought 2 things. I thought I need to keep a foot in hope and a foot in reality, meaning the reality part was that the likelihood is that no child has ever survived that disease. So it would be a really big deal if Mila survived it. And she's the very first person to receive this treatment, and we have no reference point. So the likelihood that she would die, I knew, was high, you know? And so did I go down that path and think through what that would be? No, because that's not the kind of person that I am. So the kind of person that I am is that I try to very much face things when they come and think through them, and but thinking about coffins and death and autopsies, things that actually were things, to be honest, that people brought up with me like within a week of Mila being diagnosed. And I was like, please do not talk to me about these things right now. Like, it was the worst part of the whole journey. But so I didn't go down the thought process of end of life or hospice or quality of life, because I knew myself well enough to know that at some point I trusted myself that I would check in with myself over time. And I would say, how are you feeling? And in that first year, it was like ecstatic. You know, I was like, I cannot believe. I remember opening a newspaper thing that had a picture of Mila, and it said something along the lines of like, could this be like the first time that a degenerative disease is stopped? And I was so excited. And I was like, it hit me that it was like my family and my life. And I was like, this is crazy. I knew I was fighting, but I didn't really think that this might be where we are. So it was like a high, but I still had my foot in reality as well. And then over time, as I checked in, I was kind of a little bit unsure in that second year, but like things were pretty good. Mila was laughing and smiling, and, you know, and then when I got to the third year, you know, I was crying a lot. And I was, it was kind of that being bitten by the dog when I went on the run. That's how I felt again for the first time, not right away, but over the last 6 months, it's been like this. And I knew, and I had to face decisions, you know, around a lot of these diseases. It's like, do I start adding in numerous more seizure medicines so that she can get rid of the few seizures she has? And I had to face that. I remember thinking, you know, I don't think Mila wants to have 9 seizure medicines introduced to her right now, each one of them having pretty significant side effects sometimes, you know? So that made me have to decide, if we can't get her seizures under control, and I'm not stopping her disease at this point, I can see that it's slowly going, you know, I've got to take that into mind, that she's going to die today, or she's going to die, and I could keep her alive. I keep her alive for 10 years doing what I'm doing. So it was actually kind of less about the treatment and more about, would Mila want right now? And I try to kind of constantly ask that. And it never, ever crossed my mind to stop. I never landed on the conclusion to stop Milasen, because I had gotten it down to the point for the last year and a half or more, 2 years, year and a half of no travel, no anesthesia. So like for us, I joke about this but it's really true. Taking Mila to the dentist every 6 months was way more difficult than having her having Milasen. I mean, it was prying her mouth open. She was so uncomfortable. I hated it. Milasen, she didn't even flinch. I mean, I would hold her. I would sing the Beatles songs to her, and it was a 10-minute, like, take some CSF out and put a little bit more in, and you know, put a little bit Milasen in, and she just had a little bit of numbing cream on her back. She didn't flinch. She didn't look uncomfortable. Didn't look in pain. And every 2 months, we would go from my house, drive an hour, be there for a number of hours. We just sat in a bed. They just monitored her. She didn't do anything. And I read books to her and sang to her, and we came home. You know, so for me, that versus like potentially having her seizures take off and have other things in the disease get worse, like, we had such a non-dramatic life. It just seemed like fluid. So then when I faced the end of life decisions, when they came up and I saw that I couldn't fix certain things and that her disease was going to get worse, then I faced those questions, which I knew at some point I would probably, you know. I don't know if that helps answer.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. I'm happy to jump in, and I wasn't actually reading the chat, but I'm if there's anything in there that I need to be paying attention to. I think no, I don't think there's any question.
I think we can leave it open for questions. I'll read Pat's comment. He just said, "Thank you so much. Your strength is amazing."
And I'm happy to add one more thought if it's helpful and have anyone react to this, because I was realizing that I kind of had some concluding thoughts that, you know, how do I just say this? So, you know, 60 million kids have rare diseases around the world, you know, and I was just reading a statistic that NORD put out yesterday that was talking about how, you know, there's only, you know, a few hundred treatments for rare diseases, and of those, like, only 10% of them can actually affect like 3, you know, conditions or more. And so, you know, when I look at individualized medicine, I see this as an incredible opportunity, because it is a platform approach which could cut across a ton of diseases. And for me, the fact is that a platform approach is needed to make a real impact. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here in 10 years and we're going to have, a few more, however many more treatments, and it's not going to be enough to really make it. There's going to be children getting worse and dying and living lifelong devastating, lives, their entire lives, unless we do something about it. So having a potential platform approach, to me, is an incredible opportunity, and it deserves really safe and careful and aggressive exploration. So for me, my hope is that, this group of people can help face these questions with the goal of giving this platform approach the best right now, because we need to do this. And as a parent, I'm going to go as far to say that if we, as a rare disease community, everyone involved, if we don't do this, if we don't make Everest smaller and, add some maps and some trail maps and some guides and some, if we don't do that, that's actually unethical to me. Because I think that these children and families like mine are living horrendous lives, have no hope, but to have a platform approach that should be explored and might actually really be able to help. It's not only true for ASOs, it's going to happen with CRISPR. I mean, it's just a matter of time. There'll be other individualized medicine approaches, and they are going to depend on this platform approach. So I just wanted to throw that out there as something else to maybe react to.
Brendan, did you want to hop in?
Thank you, Julia. Thank you. I second what Andrew said, that you have superpowers for a number of reasons. One is what you describe as a unique ability to both have hope and also, as I think you said, keep one foot in reality. I don't think humans are pretty well disposed to that generally. And if you could describe, if there were things that Tim did or said that helped you maintain that balance, or other tools you used to maintain that balance, it would be very helpful.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think the two examples I gave in the beginning were two of the more helpful ones. One about describing, the only reference point I had, which was how wildly successful Spinraza was, but for a different disease, and trying to explain that SMA was it was an easier target disease if you're giving something through the lower lumbar, since it's in the spine, and that it's more complicated to deliver a drug into the depths of the brain, and all of Mila's neurons were affected. And I think that that's true for any of these complicated neurological diseases, whether it be gene therapy, gene replacement therapy, or ASO. Is, it's a game of, can we get to these cells and can we penetrate them and can we make enough of it? So he explained that concept and kind of drew it out for me. And then the other example being the neurons that had died, the neurons that were in the process of dying, that we might be able to stop, and those that we're not in the time to stop. And that concept of potentially not being black and white, it's not dualistic, like it's either going to be, a cure or it's not going to work. It was really explaining that there would be this kind of continuum or the spectrum, and that we didn't know where we were going to fall, but that the possibility of limbo, is real. And I think limbo is actually something that really needs to be addressed right now in this community, because it's probably going to be the reality for a lot of kids. Now, are they in a point of limbo where they feel happy with their quality of life? It's very possible. That's not where I landed, because it was a degenerative disease, so it continued taking its course, but if it's not a degenerative disease, or it manages to stop it, and you're kind of in that limbo that you've been explained from the beginning, that could also be a good quality of life. Other things that Tim explained, I think I tried to ask all the questions, and he tried really hard he was always very respectful at explaining things to me. So, if it was an MRI over time, and I saw that, with that disease, brain mass, the brain decreases in volume and size. And so if we saw that it's slightly decreased over time, he would explain both sides of that. Like, We don't know yet if ASOs take some time to stop brain loss. They may never stop it. In Mila's case, it might have just been too late, but it also might be that it takes some time. So he would kind of play both sides and explain that. He would explain to me that the brain loss that we were seeing was worth noting. It's not ideal, but it also wasn't massive. It was less than what we might have expected. So he really tried to always show both sides. And that kept me being able to be like, okay, I've still got a foot in hope. And so did he. But then, but you know what? We got to be careful because if this continues, we're not really being able to fully stop brain loss, and then there was a point where in the last year where I could feel that, it was pretty clear that we were not going to be able to stop the disease, and being able to ask those questions to him and having him answer them, frankly, in the sense that he was never going to put words in my mouth. But when I would ask questions, it doesn't look like we're stopping the disease. He would be honest and say, yeah, right now it doesn't look like that, So honesty, clarity, and explaining things. I think, for me, at least, I got it, I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Julia, it's Pat Furlong. I represent Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a rare disease affecting primarily boys, usually diagnosed around the age of 3 or 4 years old, sometimes a bit later. But I think in Batten's disease, there's such severe cognitive impairment, right? I guess an N=1 at this moment, if someone, and clearly having watched my 2 sons die, I think if someone would have said smoke signals up the chimney might work, I would have explored it to the point of trying to figure out if that was a realistic possibility. But I don't think if someone came to me with a single therapy, even if it had been used in other instances with my benefit risk assessment would be quite different, right? Because these boys, in my case, and not all Duchenne are, some of the boys have some cognitive impairment or on the spectrum. I was blessed to have boys that were quite smart and actually spoke up many times when I didn't want them to exactly. But I think the benefit risk would be far different for me because I couldn't keep a foot in. Just assessing this N=1 that had never been done that could shorten their progression, kill them, or maybe help them. I think that in many instances, the things that I explored for them, starting with myoblast transfer and on into other therapies, my benefit risk would have been far different just based on their cognitive ability and their interest in their own particular quality of life and what they felt was important in their lives. And I can say to you, my son Patrick told me one day he was the most loved person in the earth because he was the smartest kid in the class. I'm not sure that equals love, but for him that day, it did. So I think this would be an incredibly difficult decision for me for such a trial of this is a first out of the gate. I think then further, I can say to you, my husband is in medicine. We both have been in medicine, and he had far different opinions about this. And I think it would have been a very difficult decision if we're going to do it regardless of the risk, because the risk of not treatment. We know the lifespan right now is about 25 to 30 years old. So I think, when you have this lifespan that is great, they're significant in terms of 20 years following diagnosis, it becomes really challenging. I don't disagree with you. 60 million children deserve treatments. And I think we collectively have to figure out what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. That's a good, thank you for bringing up. That's a good point. I would say that having had Mila's story kind of in the spotlight, I've just been lucky enough to talk to parents, hundreds of parents across so many diseases, across so many countries. And the general feedback I've gotten has been that, especially for a disease that is eventually fatal, pretty much every single person I've talked to has said that if they would like, not only if, that they would do like everything in the world to get to the point, to be able to be in my position, to be able to have that choice. And they would all have said that they would do it, even if it was early. But I will say one caveat, because you're making me think of this, which is that most of the diseases that of the people I've talked to are pretty much, probably fatal around within 20 years. And so for them, the feedback I've received is that even if I were to cut a number of years off my child's life, like my child's gonna have no other shot. And so like I have to, and it looks really legit science. So it's not crazy. If it were crazy, they wouldn't do it. So they all felt like that. The children, the few families I've talked to where it's a little unsure whether, for example, a very rare type of batten where like it might be fatal and it might not, and that they're kind of losing vision, but and losing cognition, but not fully. And like, maybe they're the kind of the outlier that like could live longer. They are probably more likely to say, this is this early wave and we want kids to do this. In fact, we don't want our child to take the place of a dying young child. But in a few years' time, when we know more, then I would consider that place, the less kind of really quick moving diseases. That would just be what I'm hearing. And I will say that interestingly, I've been really fascinated by the families that reach out to me that have children that don't have fatal diseases. It's a whole new interest of mine because I always was super laser focused on fatal diseases because there's no other option. And the children, families that have children with lifelong, really debilitating diseases, all of them say something that just hits me so hard every time, which is, I just hope that my child doesn't live one day past me. And I've heard that like so many times that I can't tell you how hard it hits me. And I don't need to tell you because you obviously went through this too, is I was just obliterated. I was going to get cancer. I mean, I was going to die, and it sounds terrible, but like I was so physically and emotionally pushed to the edge every day for years, and trying to juggle a son. It really had made me think a lot about families that do this for 40, 50 years and how scared they are of their children living past them and not knowing who's going to take care of them. And so there's just a whole nother.
Oh, I think that is certainly a whole other area about aging parents and and people with disability and the responsibility that they carry, and the fact that we have no systems in place that can really assist these families in any way. I do think that we could spend a couple months on that one. I think I do think that is really difficult.
And those people, as a result, were really interested in pursuing, potentially something like a Milasen, because even though it was a little scarier for them because it wasn't a fatal disease, they also knew how hard life was going to be and how kind of everyone was losing. The kid was losing, the parents were losing, the siblings were losing, and they felt like, if this is a legit shot, I'd like to give it to my child and also help science. So I've been hearing a lot of that as well, which is interesting. I didn't think about that,
In our Duchenne population, our benefit risk, as they get older, they're less risk. They are less willing to take risk. They would like to live in whatever quality of life that they have. They seem to appreciate it, at least in the studies that we've done.
That's interesting.
I do see a difference of opinion sometimes in the
I might see if Andrew wants to jump in here. I think you had a response, and then maybe Emma can have our last question.
Yeah, for sure. And it's no surprise that it's the three parents that are going back and forth on this, as we all are parents and running organizations and that sort of thing. Julia, I wanted to point out that at the beginning of us beginning all of this research into MPS 6, MPS 2, CLN2, et cetera, all of our families that helped us raise money, et cetera, and it's an ultra rare disease. My son was one of 3 in the country at the time when he was diagnosed. All said the same thing as well. Like if they could, they do it no matter what. But I think over the last 15 years, when I've dealt with all of these families from across the world, what we understand is that these N of 1 therapies are just that, but also every single decision that these families make are also N of 1 decisions as well. And so as they're dealing with raising the money, and yes, they'd like to do it, once the opportunity gets presented to them, then it becomes a very difficult and harsh reality. And we've had a lot of families that have been raising money for us that get these clinical trials off the ground that have then opted out from participation in the gene therapy or whatever treatment is going on, simply because at that stage or wherever they're at, situations change, et cetera, right? So it's an interesting evolution for all of these families, for all of these different heterogeneous rare diseases, et cetera. And right off the get-go, it's yes. And So it's hard to sort of generalize, and I know that you're not, but just from the 15-year outlook where we're at now, and all the families that we've had, everything becomes such an important individual decision, and there's so much that changes. So it's
No, I think that's actually a really good point. And I started this gene therapy, and I even though I started the gene replacement therapy well before it actually kicked off, I withdrew Mila. I told them that Mila was not going to be doing that because it was too late in her disease over this last year, where like I could have tried to say, oh, she could have an ASO and a gene therapy, where if she were in another place, I would absolutely consider that. But I could see that that was not the right place. So I think that it's even more important, based on what you just said, which is a great point, that these individualized, today they're ASOs, they could be CRISPR later. It's really important to obviously diagnose children earlier and really give the children that are amenable, their disease and their mutation is amenable, and they're in the right spot to be able to stop their disease in time. It is really important to do everything we can to bring up these issues, but open up these doors and have these kids, be as many of them as possible, be treated to see how do they react, what is the efficacy. It looks, on paper, it looks like this quadrant of ASOs that's given, splice mutations and given through the CNS, or CNS diseases given through the CSF, like Spinraza, like Milasen. It looks like it's high efficacy and low toxicity. Therefore, we need more children in the right place that are amenable to be treated, so we can have the data that can allow us to keep opening this up and have a platform approach that could then be for well beyond one disease, but for potentially hundreds. That's a big deal, Yeah.
For sure. Well, listen, kudos to you for sharing those photos as well. I was
you.
messaging somebody and saying that I appreciated it, but I felt like you're opening the door to my house and letting other people see into my house too. And
thank you for saying that, because thank you for saying that, because that is why I did it. That's the reason I launched this photo journal, was not so much just to show my life or Mila's or life with Batten disease. Is what I learned from talking to other families like yours, is that while these diseases look different and their symptoms are different, the physical and emotional impact on the families is the same. And so that's kind of why I did this black and white. And I've had many families, and I appreciate that, say, this feels like this is my life. And that's the purpose of it, so thank you.
And a lot of us can't open that door to even our close friends and families. So thanks for doing that for us. So.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
I know Emma was trying to get in. Maybe we'll leave you with the last question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Sure. Thank you so much, Julia. Yeah, it was very emotional listening to your presentation. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm currently working in the epilepsy space, and what we're finding is that because there are some existing treatments, although they don't address even a fraction of the underlying pathology in some of the genetic epilepsies, we're really finding that the neither the medical nor the patient community is very up to speed, I guess, on genetics, which clearly you at this point are. You're talking in very sophisticated language about very complex therapies. And so I was just wondering what your experience was during your journey with Mila in getting to Dr. Yu, and somebody who could really talk to you in a very meaningful way about the risks and benefits of different treatments. And was your experience that he was an outlier, or was he, or did most of the people you came into contact with understand this kind of issue? And just from that, I was wondering, from your experience, is there anything that we can do to help improve the understanding of the community on these kinds of topics to make it a little bit easier for other people who might be grappling with this kind of experience?
Thank you, Emma. Those are really good questions. I do think that Tim does an amazing job at explaining, especially using analogies, so that average people can understand things like me. And I do think he is actually setting a precedent, which is kind of nice, actually. I can see that other people around him kind of see how much respect he gives to me and how he explains things in as much detail as I need, instead of assuming that I can't understand anything. And he's just going to say, oh, well, high level, no. Instead he explains why he doesn't think that that would work or something, and he also opens it up and asks me as well, this is what I think. I don't think this is a good idea, but I'd like to hear what you think, and so there's more of a conversation. And I've seen other people around him really look to him and really start to kind of mimic a little bit that relationship. I don't have enough experience. I haven't worked with other PIs as closely as Tim, but I will say that I do notice that when I ask questions, of which I have a lot, that people, doctors, physicians, and researchers generally have been great at meeting me where I think it's important that parents don't feel stupid, because I don't have a PhD and I don't have an MD. So I in the beginning kind of felt really hesitant to ask questions, because I thought, well, my question must be really stupid because I'm not going to ask it. But it's really important to empower the parents to ask the questions, because they're often actually good questions and they shouldn't be afraid to have them. And then on the other side, the physicians and scientists that I've seen, when I've gone deeper and asked more complex questions, they have said, oh, well, I can see she's asking this complex question, so let me try to meet her where she's at. So I've actually had a really good positive experience from everyone I've talked to. But I do think that it's important for parents not only ask questions, but also ask the difficult ones about, like, hey, well, so what if this treatment only does this? Where might it leave me? The problem is the scientists and the doctors don't know the answer to it because this is so new. But having them play out different scenarios would be something I would promote, so that the parents aren't caught off guard. They're like, oh, I remember that the PI or whatever kind of told me there might be this very different options that might happen, so that when they do happen, you start seeing your child do this or do that. You think, oh, okay, that's what they were referring to, so you're not caught off guard. I don't know if that helps, but I do think that Tim and I try to put myself in positions, and I have some ideas in the future of making sure that these potential PIs and these potential families, we're working on ways to make sure that they are hearing this message so that they can take what Tim did well and build on it and do things that work for them, and that the families can ask the right questions and really feel like they're very informed from the beginning. I don't know if that
it does. That's great feedback. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. I think when you were answering the question, I was like, oh, maybe Dr. Yu was an outlier. And I'm thinking Julia as a mom was probably also a little bit of an outlier, but certainly we as a working group want to see what best practices we can promote.
And sharing them is important, because, while it is flattering that a bunch of people have said, including the FDA, that, not all parents are like Julia, not all PIs are like Tim. Well, it's flattering. It's also not so helpful for the field either, in the sense that there probably are a lot of parents out there that could ask the right questions if they're kind of empowered, and that, and that there's probably a lot of PIs that could really do a great job at explaining. I think it's just a matter of Tim and I being pretty central in this, and we're trying to be. And then all of you guys as well, is kind of getting this out, is ask the right questions. And PIs, like, talk about the different possibilities. And if everyone starts doing this, I have a feeling that it's going to become, more common.
Yeah.
Hey, Julia, I'm so sorry I missed much of your conversation, and I know that we're already over, so we're going to let you go and reclaim your day, especially since you're on vacation. But before you go, at the end of our agenda, I was going to tell people about your gene fixers on Clubhouse. And since you're here, maybe you want to tell them. So do you want to just give them like a 1 minute explanation of what that is, in case anyone's interested?
Sure. So there's a new social media app called Clubhouse. It's on your phone right now. Unfortunately, it's only for iPhones. It was started by a good friend of mine, Rohan Seth, who is a father, a rare disease father to a little girl, Lydia, who is about 2 years old, who has a rare disease. He happened to be an early Googler, worked at Google, and he came up with Clubhouse about a year ago. It has taken off, especially in biotech, very recently. It's gone from 10,000 members when I joined in September, and now it has like 7 million users, and everyone in the United States is getting on it, in the world as well. I co-moderate a group called Gene Fixers. It's every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Anyone who wants to can jump in. We keep the room open. I can send Allison an email and maybe you can diffuse it of just like how you do that. It's invite only to Clubhouse. I'm happy to invite whoever wants to. And then you can join this group. It's an hour long. I co-moderate with Ethan Perlstein, who's a PhD, who's very involved in the rare disease community. And we have people come on, like Tim Yu, for example. We have Peter Marks coming on, for example, soon. We've got a lot of really interesting people that are scientists, researchers, CEOs, biotechs, and they come in and they kind of present for 10, 15 minutes a topic, and we're trying to bring on important topics. Some of them like this, like the ones we've talked about. Other ones like shelving IPs for rare disease, which I'm personally think is a big problem. And having someone talk about this, and then you open it up and people can jump up on the quote unquote stage. It's audio only, so you can be washing your dishes and driving or doing whatever you want, which is great. You just unmute when you're kind of like brought onto stage and say, hey, here's my thoughts, or I have a question. And then you're muted and dropped off. And then, Peter Marks responds or something. So I would love for you guys to join, and Allison, I will send you an email you can forward on if that's helpful.
That's great. Thanks, Julia. And you did that
Sure.
much more eloquently than I could have, since it's your Clubhouse. So
yeah.
Anyway, I think if anyone else has questions for Julia, just send them to Kara. We can pass them to her via email afterwards. And thank you so much for your time, Julia. And thanks to Richard and Lynn for joining us today too. It's really lovely to see your faces.
Thank you for having us. And thank you, Julia, as always.
Yes, of course. And please, it looks like I'm just trying to scroll quickly through these messages. And so if Allison, I don't know if you or anyone else here is willing to, because once you get off, I'm going to lose all these, is just pass on my email.
I think John's going to have, John, do you archive these messages with the recording? Do you?
Yep. Yeah, we
do. So any messages that are in the chat, we can just forward on to you.
Perfect. Sounds wonderful. And then I can't remember, Allison, I'm blanking on whether or not I sent you my photojournal This Is Today link or not. And if not, I'll send that as